Good evening and welcome. I'm Michelle DiMarzo, the Curator of Education and Academic Engagement for the Fairfield University Art Museum. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Clara Rojas-Sebesta. Her talk tonight forms part of the Edwin L. Weisl Lectureships in Art History, funded by the Robert Lehman Foundation, and has also been generously supported by the Department of Visual and Performing Arts. Our invitation to Clara was made in conjunction with the show that's on view in the Walsh Gallery that is just down the hall and which will be open until 8 p.m., so after the talk. It's entitled Sacred Space, a Brandywine Workshop and Archives Exhibition, which is almost entirely composed of offset lithographs produced by the Brandywine Workshop in Philadelphia. And works on paper, as you may or may not know, are among the most fragile objects in any museum's collection, and they have their own very specific requirements for collections care and for conservation. Our speaker this evening, Clara Rojas-Sebesta, is the Ellsworth Kelly Conservator of Works on Paper at the Whitney Museum of American Art since 2015. Her primary work there is in the preservation and care of the museum's collection of prints, drawings, and photographs, some of which we will hear about this evening. She's also published and presented on the theoretical and practical framework of the museum's replication committee, which considers requests for the replication of works of art in the Whitney's permanent collection and discusses related matters of refabrication, exhibition copies, and issues around authenticity. She's also conducted artists' interviews for the Artist Documentation Program at the Whitney, which initiates conversations between conservators and artists to help the museum understand not only the materials and processes used, something that is really important with contemporary art that might be materially ephemeral, meaning not meant to last, might be time-based, might be interactive, might even be conceptual, but also to understand the artist's own intent and views around the preservation of their work, or maybe lack thereof. Among the artists Clara has interviewed for this program are June Leaf, John Quick-to-See Smith, Gamaliel Rodriguez, Rogelio Baez-Vega, and Lotus Kang. Prior to her current position at the Whitney, she was a conservator in private practice, as well as a museum educator and an arts accessibility advocate. She graduated from the Conservation Center of the Institute of Fine Arts, NYU, with a specialization in the conservation of works on paper, and holds a master's in art history from Rutgers University with a BA in art history from Cornell University. Please join me in welcoming Clara Rojas-Sebesta.
Well, thank you so very much for having me here today. To speak in conjunction with Ink and Time and Sacred Space, the two print exhibitions currently on view. The Whitney Museum has both European print traditions of woodcuts, engravings, etchings, aquatints, as well as the more experimental works found at the Brandywine Workshop, with many of the artists in Brandywine Workshop, including the Bob Blackburn Workshop, being found in the Whitney Museum's collection. So hopefully you'll find some resonances tonight in my presentation with what your experiences of those exhibitions have been. So I'm going to start with a quick introduction to the Whitney Museum and the Conservation Department, and then move on to some of my favorite projects and highlights of the work that I do at the Whitney Museum. So the Whitney Museum is a museum of American art focused on the 20th and 21st century, with a special focus on living artists. And that was Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney's mission. Her mandate was to support living artists in various ways. And our mission has adapted to support artists with stipends when they're included in exhibitions, and really trying to support them in many ways. And the premier way we do that is through the biennial, which every 2 years kind of takes a survey of contemporary art. And we just closed our most recent iteration a few months ago in September. And we already have the two new curators, Marcela Guerrero and Drew Sawyer, who are out there on the road seeking the artists for the next biennial. So it's a constant sort of process of support of living artists. The Conservation Department is actually relatively new, starting in the year 2000 by Carol Mancusi-Ungaro with only two conservators, a paintings conservator and a project-based sculpture conservator. It then expanded when we moved to the new building seen here by Renzo Piano in 2015. This is located in Meatpacking. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to visit, but I hope you do. So I have the honor of being the first full-time paper conservator at the Whitney Museum. The lab was quite small at the old building. So as you can see from our permanent collection of 26,000 objects, almost 80%, 21,000 of those works are on paper, including prints, drawings, photographs, and books. So it's quite a big responsibility to take care of all those works. Now, the work of a conservator involves, as you might know, examination of the works of art. That's where we start. I spend a lot of time close looking, trying to identify the materials and techniques and assess condition. We then do documentation, written reports, imaging, scientific analysis, and the artist interviews that you just heard about right now. It's really important for us. We're constantly thinking 100, 200 years from now to make sure that the information that we're gleaning, since we know these works are constantly changing, and we're really entering this object's lifespan at a unique time with contemporary artists when they're first being created. Preventive conservation, the field is in general shifting towards preventing, and it's important also for modern and contemporary art. Again, we're at its sort of initial point in its life. So really focusing on protective storage and display, and the conservators work with many departments in the building to make sure that is happening. Treatment, I think, is what most people would associate with a conservator's job, the restoration, treatment of damage or anything age-related issues, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. What's unique to modern and contemporary art conservation is the opportunity we have to work with living artists and as well as their estates. So we really have, again, close conception. We're able to get their ideas about change, deterioration, how they want their works treated. It's also an opportunity to glean as much information we can about the materials being used to create those works. Because we're finding, particularly in the 21st century now, that artists are constantly challenging us with the materials they choose to work with. Breaking those boundaries, changing the condition of art making in all those ways that Michelle referred to in terms of time-based media, and just really moving outside of that art supply store. Not usually where they're getting their materials. Anyway, that's where the most fun challenges are for me. So that's really an exciting part of being a conservator of modern and contemporary art. And then finally, the replication as a conservation strategy, and I'll get into that a little bit more as well. Within the museum context, collaboration is essential. Conservators touch all the departments in the museum, with curators as they're developing and acquiring works for the collection, with exhibition and collection management, art handling, preparators, and registration as they are preparing the works for exhibition and display, acquisition, exhibition and lighting design for works on paper is especially important. Security and visitor services, when we have crowded galleries, being able to have very clear communication with our visitor services staff and how they work with the public around these particularly fragile works is really important. Education, building maintenance and engineers, making sure our temperature and RH are where they need to be, as well as advancement to get all our projects going. So this is, I'll give you kind of a little bit of a tour of the conservation lab at the Whitney Museum. Much of our work starts here, and this is our photo studio where we begin with examination of materials and trying to understand what we're looking at and documenting it before, during, and after treatment, making sure that any change that we make to the work is readily available, again, for those future conservators and scholars. We move beyond the sort of beautiful photography that you see in the galleries to lighting it in the worst way possible to show that surface, raking light, transmitted light, showing any areas of changing gloss. That really gives us a lot of information about the work that we're looking at. We also have in our studio an opportunity to view works in UV light. So what this does is allow us to identify, through the fluorescence of various materials, choices that the artists are making in terms of the materials that they're using. And so here I have our paintings conservators taking a look at this oil-on linen. UV light also reveals other interventions, maybe that a conservator, or in this case the artist, made to areas that had been damaged. And he used a different kind of white paint, and that's what and adhesive to try to glue down some areas that were cracked and dented. In the lower right corner, you can see what raking light looks like. So you can really see the weave of the canvas and the changes in the surface. UV light also reveals tapes, adhesives, stains, and residues, as well as other cleaning treatments and some that can be revealed in UV light. Infrared light also is used to reveal aspects of the materiality. Here we have the way in which infrared light radiation can make certain materials transparent or absorb or reflect, reveals under drawings because the oil is transparent, the canvas reflects, and the charcoal absorbs. So that's where you get to really understand what's underneath that paint layer, to really understand the process that the artist is using. Another tool we have in the lab is a portable X-ray fluorescence, and that's only for elemental analysis. It tells us what's present, but it doesn't tell us kind of the ratios. It can be used for metals to identify what alloys could be there, but it doesn't give us a lot of quantitative information about this. We're a relatively small lab. We would outsource any additional scientific analysis to larger institutions that have conservation science departments and specialized expertise. The Met has an enormous conservation science department, and they've actually started an initiative where they are offering those resources to other smaller arts institutions. They started in New York and are now moving globally and nationally. So that's a resource we can take advantage of. So really starting this examination is really important for understanding the artist's decision-making process, which contributes to the meaning and cultural interpretation of the work. It also helps us with condition assessment, as well as preservation, storage, and treatment decisions. Something we recently acquired is this microfader testing tool. So what this allows me to do, particularly as the works on paper are the most light-sensitive objects in the collection. You think about watercolors, pastels, color photographs, how quickly they change. It's really important for us to be able to understand how they're going to change over time. So what the microfader allows us to do is expose a very small area of an artwork, less than 0.5 millimeter of the work, to very high-intensity light, and we use a spectrophotometer to measure the color change at 1-second intervals over 10 minutes. And we take that information and we can extrapolate how this particular object, that material, will react to light over 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, at different light levels. And this really helps us with our exhibition and preservation decisions making. Now, the reason why the microfader is such an important tool is that we have a general understanding that watercolors, you pick a different color, they're rated by the manufacturers, but artists almost never use a color purely out of a tube. They mix it and they add different additives, and we don't have the history of where that object has been. So in the past, before this tool, all our assessments of the light sensitivity and the vulnerability of these works was just was not quite specific to the object. So this has really been helpful. And our architecture really creates the challenge for us for works on paper. This beautiful Renzo piano building with floor-to-ceiling, 20 to 30 foot high windows that look out to the Hudson River, that look out to the skyline, generate a lot of light. And the curators and as an institution, we really want to respect the architecture, but we also want to be able to plan our exhibitions where not all the works on paper are stuck in a vault in the middle of the exhibition. So the relationship with the landscape and other artists' work was important to us. So we had to get another tool to really be able to make those decisions. You can see here we have a way of measuring light. It's reading 200 foot candles in the window there. For guidance, I don't know if you know, a watercolor or a color photograph should be 5 to 7 foot candles. So a lot more light than I would recommend for a lot of the work. So it's really been important for us to be involved in those decision-making process. So preventive conservation, preventing the damage, because fading cannot be reversed. This is not something that any conservator right now can treat until the magic wand is invented that allows us to reverse that. The other essential parts for preventive conservation would be storage, proper storage and display. For works on paper, the greatest cause of damage is improper housing, acidic materials that are placed to store it, tapes, different things like that. So I work very closely with our paper preparators, seen here, and we have an opportunity also adjacent to the lab is the Works on Paper Study Center, where students and professors and artists can come request to see works in person without the glazing. It's really an incredible opportunity, and I encourage you all to take advantage of that. It's an email away. So all these spaces are adjacent to our conservation lab. So these are the shots when we first moved in, so it's all very clean and beautiful right now. And you'll notice some of the design features here in the lab. Everything's on wheels, everything is movable. We have our beautiful north-facing light for in-painting and color accuracy. And you'll see that everything had to be very flexible. All of us work together in a single lab. In some museums, the paper conservator, paintings conservator, and sculpture conservator all work in their separate spaces. But it's really essential in modern and contemporary conservation in particular to have us all together in one space, because artists, again, they don't follow the rules and just work on one kind of material. So I'm very often collaborating with Margot, our sculpture conservator in particular, as well as Matt, the paintings conservator. And you can see here that things are constantly moving around. We're exhibition and loan driven. We have very large objects that come in, like the Linda Benglis pour. So everything else had to be moved to the margins. And so at that point in the lab, I may have been sitting on a little table in the corner working on doing some of my traditional treatments here. You can see something that you might expect, a sort of standard treatment procedure would be the surface cleaning that I'm doing on the photograph under the microscope, looking very carefully to make sure I'm not altering the surface as I clean it. There's a small mend being applied on the drawing for a loss. Often the decision to mend or fill a loss can depend on the use of the drawing. So that's another decision making that happens sometimes with the curator. The other space that to show you here is our wet treatment lab. Again, like the main lab, it's a multifunction space. So this is a place where I can wash works on paper, like this print you're seeing here. It's also a place where small sculptures could be washed. We have our fume hood to mix chemicals safely, as well as our beautiful pigment collection that makes various in-painting, custom in-painting materials possible. Because again, sometimes what is available to us commercially doesn't quite fit the bill. So here's another up-close shot of what sheet of paper looks like when it's being washed. Sometimes people are quite surprised at the strength of a sheet of paper. This is one kind of washing technique called float washing, where you're really taking advantage of the surface tension of the water, and the sheet just floats on the surface, and the capillary action draws out the deterioration or acidic products from the back with minimal disturbance of the media on the surface. So that's one kind of strategy that you can use to wash. I'm also doing some testing here for some stains that were on this beautiful little Wandagog wood engraving. So this is an old master printing technique that was taken advantage by this artist in 1928. A beautiful little Christmas card. And this show is up at the Whitney until about December 2nd. It's a beautiful jewel of a print show as well. In painting, or image compensation is a sort of other treatment approach that you may be familiar with here. I'm working on a Jim Shaw from 1987 and using both watercolor and pastel. One of the challenges with in painting is matching the sheen. So I was working under the microscope to try to compensate for areas that were flaking off of this beautiful little gouache painting. So the final space in the lab is our time-based media lab. Now, time-based media is a contemporary work that includes video, film, slide, audio, or computer technologies. This is your internet-based art, your AI, and they are durational or unfold over time. And here you see Savannah Campbell, who's our time-based media conservator. And time-based media is a really interesting intersection with photography, sculpture, conceptual art, and performance art. And there's overlapping strategies for preservation. So Savannah's addition to the team has been really important as time-based media is really influencing art making and conservation. So I'm going to go into some of the more non-traditional materials and display formats that I've encountered in my 10 years at the Whitney. We have artists just challenging what is a print. These are our 3D prints, rapid prototypes, moving into multiples and from digital files and different materials. Again, collaboration with my sculpture and time-based media conservator to sort of consider how these plastics will age and what reprinting and refabrication will look like. We have, in the 60s, we have another sort of appropriation of different printmaking techniques with artists taking advantage of these new computer-based technologies. The photocopier, really in the 1960s and 70s, really changed the way artists were making prints, and they have their own vulnerabilities. Photocopier, the Bob Whitman prints on the left, photocopies of oranges on a photocopy machine are incredibly light sensitive, and so I was able to use the microfader to test those, and they are. Blue wool one is kind of our most sensitive. These were like a blue wool 1/4, like one of the most light sensitive materials that I've encountered so far, and they're so pristine and beautiful. The colors that were created by at this time. So in an effort to preserve them, they're shown for very limited periods of time, and because I had that data, I was able to have them shown for 6 weeks and then replaced. But it was important, they were represented, and we're preserving them for the future. And those are theoretical, philosophical questions about exposure as well that I'm happy to talk about later. Leslie Schiff with Baby Doll, she also was an artist working with a photocopier, and there seemed to have been a movement, particularly with women artists, taking control of these readily accessible art-making technologies because they were being excluded from the more traditional print shops and had access to these technologies through work. So it's really interesting where material has meaning in that way. So really important to understand what the materials are. Another artist challenging, expanding, playing with, and then she really talks about how she explores these different materials. This is Alan Gallagher's Deluxe 60 prints that begin with a photogravure lithograph base. And then she adds additions here. You can see that medium line, collage, plasticine, acrylic, pomade, laser cutting, metal foil, googly eyes, velvet. What she's done is taking photographs from advertisements in magazines from the 30s through the 70s for hair care products and skin care products in magazines targeted particularly to Black audiences and thinking about beauty. And she's sort of taking that and appropriating it and playing with it, sculpting these different wigs and different matters of adornment. And she talks a little bit about race identity as well as play and the joy of making. So really the importance of those materials are really, they're very particular. The other amazing thing about this series is that it's an edition of 20. So for 20 versions of those 60 prints, not only was there printing with photogravure, lithography, screen print, but she's replicating and repeating over and over all those plasticine elements. In this element, the one in the middle is a screen printed, stenciled hair pomade, coconut oil, and the plasticine and laser cutting on the left. So what you're seeing also, or I hope you can see, is the change that's happening over time. So the oil and the discoloration is seeping into the paper around it over time. And I looked at it in 2010 and then again in 2020, and it was very visible, the change, the expansion of that. So the question to the artist is, as a conservator, there's really nothing I can do to prevent that change from happening. So is this how is she going to feel about this change? And I also need to reach out to some of the other holders of the edition MoMA Met to see if their works are also changing in the same way, and if there's anything I can do in terms of storage to prevent this kind of change. So the concept of change is always a consideration for our conservators of all media and periods, but it tends to happen faster in modern and contemporary art. We had Edward Rouché's News, Muse, Pews, Brews, Stews, and Do's, and he has taken various food products, foodstuffs, to create the inks, and he has very kindly, generously presented us all the information about specifically what those are, including the brand names in case you want to buy them and maybe make them yourself. But also thinking about how these are going to age. These are not shown very often. We haven't had the capacity yet to do the microfade testing and assessment of how these will change over time. So at the moment, we're taking a quite conservative strategy in keeping these in storage until we can have a better assessment of that kind of change. This is a wonderful work by Gabriela Salazar. So she's taking the collotype technique, where on a plate, a matrix, you lay everyday objects, ordinary objects, and then lay paper over it. Normally that would be a wet piece of paper that was laid over it and put through the press so that it would take the impression of all those objects. She found this other product called, that's water-soluble paper, which when I read that in the medium line kind of gave me a heart attack. Water-soluble paper. And so the rabbit holes that I went, what is water-soluble paper? What is it used for? How soluble is it? It's quite soluble. Put a little piece in a beaker and it just expanded and dissolved. So it's used in medical treatments to deliver chemicals that dissolve easily, in packaging so that it's compostable and can dissolve over time. But artists will end up using it. So for me, the question is, how water soluble is it? How vulnerable is it? And doing some testing, just keep it wrapped and out of any kind of flood zones. So the dyes themselves are coffee dyes leaching into the wet piece of paper. So another point of vulnerability, and that was really important for her. That is sort of the essence of this. The prints are of spaces that she grew up in, places that she's lived in, and thinking about memory and how ephemeral that is. It's hard to tell on the left the scale and dimensionality of this Ebony Patterson collage of laser prints and feather butterflies. But so that's why I gave these sort of side views, so you can really see it's quite large and hung directly on the wall without a protective glazing. Normally when you see works on paper, you'll see they have plexi protection of them because they're vulnerable to air, heat, visitor interaction. There's quite a few gallery checks where we have sneezes on glazing that have to be cleaned, so thank goodness the glazing is there. But this work would be very difficult to protect in that way because oversized plexi, either has to be seamed or can be very expensive. So we have to figure out other ways of protecting. And there's this tension between preservation and presentation. We just really want to honor the artist's wishes to not have that barrier between the artwork, but still be able to protect it. This is a work from the recent biennial Lotus Kang in Cascades. Again, for the biennial, a lot of the works are being fabricated during installation in situ, specifically to that space, or they're works that are experimental. Lotus hadn't worked with this film, but we received the information about it, and I saw the listing of continually sensitive, unfixed photographic film. So if you've done any work with photographic film, you know that surface is super vulnerable, it won't get fingerprints, it's very soft, and will change very quickly. So I had the opportunity to work with the artist. She gave me some samples before. I was able to do some testing, and to my surprise, because this was a commercially used film for store displays, and it's quite stable. Great surprise. So what her goal is to actually have these things change slowly or over time. She views these films as kind of analogs for skin and the body being exposed to the environment. So she wants the kind of change. She's inviting that change. And sometimes the change doesn't happen fast enough for artists, and that's our other challenge. So we were being very conservative with our light levels. I think next time we might be able to, this is 5 to 7 foot candles, we might be able to illuminate it more to maybe induce more change, or perhaps show it in the windows there. It's an ongoing conversation that we'll have with the artist. Another work that incorporates, again, the installation of more performative works. This is Gabriela Baez's work, where she's exploring memories of her father. These framed photographs were installed and screwed to that pedestal, and then she sewed in the galleries just a week prior to the installation the connections between herself and her father in this sort of very moving performance, creating those connections. It's part of it was in our No Existe Un Mundo Post-Huracán about Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. So she was really thinking about those connections, things that were lost. The challenge to us, again, once it comes down, how do I reinstall it? How do I preserve it? That when we no longer have that artist who is there to create those connections, how do we recreate them? And part of that will be in documentation, but we were also able to save the works not in that same configuration. The connections are still there. Hopefully we'll have the opportunity to go through those problems in the near future. For Zoe Leonard, How to Make Good Pictures, we became co-producers with the artist in preparation for our exhibition. Often the challenge for artists when they're moving from a gallery space to the Whitney during the biennial is the higher level of visitorship that we encounter. And it was hard actually for her to imagine until she came to the Whitney on a Sunday and saw the strollers and the selfies and sort of the people moving through space without being aware of their bodies. And then she understood that this work, How to Make Good Pictures, which comprised 429 books in these stacks according to year, would easily be toppled over in those sort of, we're just imagining people going over to see the view, take pictures, or backing up from the windows to take the picture. So we worked with her to create a solution of actually drilling holes in all the books. She was a little horrified, Paper Conservator was horrified, but it was really the only way to make sure that this sculpture, it was a transformation of found objects into a sculpture by inserting this steel rod armature through all those books. So really the role of the artist is actually essential here, and this is Suzanne Jackson and Lotus Kang in these artist documentation program interviews, which are really a great opportunity for us to record the artist's voice in front of their artwork. Obviously, there's many ways of getting this information, but we found that this is a really important way to do this. So, the third strategy for contemporary art that replicas are created in other collections, so I'm going to talk specifically about how they're used in modern and contemporary art conservation today. So the first reason why we might recreate artworks is for didactic models or mock-ups to really try to understand an artist's working process. For the Wanda Gogg show, we discovered as we were going through her works that she created this innovative technique of a sandpaper lithograph. So in her research, we found out that she just had scraps of sandpaper that she'd been doing drawings of, and then she realized she could pull prints from that. And Scout, the curator, and I were really curious as how that might work. So we found some sandpaper, found some crayons and paper, and really discovered how many variables are involved in printmaking. And it's a really important exercise for any scholar, I think, to try to get your hands on some artwork and really understand all that's involved in creating an artwork. The mock-ups also give us an opportunity to recreate an object that we can do testing on. We can clean, we can test solvents, different strategies before we approach the actual work. Another opportunity that I had to work with recreating, and really one of the highlights so far of my work at the Whitney, was the Ruth Asawa exhibition last year. She's primarily known for these wire sculptures on the left, but she actually had an incredible drawing practice every day. She was an artist, a Japanese-American artist who went to Black Mountain College and worked with Albers and just really infused this art and life philosophy. So she just, all her life involved art making every day. She had 6 children, they all made art. They said, if you want to get mom's attention, help her with the artwork. So we had opportunity to look at a lot of her drawing techniques. She modified her own fiber tip pens, creating slits so she can create these beautiful patterns, so trying to recreate some of that. But the biggest challenge was in this large paper fold. Both through her Japanese heritage and study of origami, as well as her studies at Black Mountain College, where Albers and Buckminster Fuller challenged all students to take a sheet of paper and fold it to these various forms. These were their sort of engineering and problem-solving exercises. So she created a great many paper folds, and this was one that was chosen to be in the exhibition. We worked very closely with the family, who had stored the paper fold in this compact way, and we were I had some time to talk with the daughters who actually worked with her to create these paper folds, really just trying to explore that. Asawa used some of these paper folds in performances, so some of the questions were, is it meant to be static? Is it meant to expand and contract? Is this an aspect of the work that I needed to preserve before getting it ready for exhibition? One of the challenges I gave myself, since it was going back to the family after the show, was to create a non-adhesive mount to get it up on the wall. And so that led to, after a lot of cleaning and stabilizing, an exploration of origami. So I kind of went in deep in trying to recreate these models, trying to understand if there was a way for to use origami to hold up the origami. I failed. It didn't work. But I did get the opportunity to create through the recreation of this origami sheet, which was actually a 48 by 60 sheet, really understand the structure, the strength of a sheet of paper, as well as understanding that in the process of folding a very large sheet of paper. The original for this was 96 by 72 inches wide. So to create that many folds, you had to both undo and redo folds and sort of trust that it's going to go back into the shape. But you could also see where all the creases came and the tears and the handling. And those would be things that I wouldn't necessarily want to address through treatment. There's a lot of choosing to leave evidence of the art-making process in that work. And this was the question that was posed to me here. So it was hand-painted with black ink on this white paper. Some of her other paper folds were pre-printed. So I posed this question to my colleagues: should I in-paint the tops of those mountains? And the sculpture conservator said, no, it's part of the work. It's an object that's been used, let it be. The paintings conservator said, no, fix that, make it all uniform. Those black lines are supposed to be black lines. So unfortunately, again, I did have the family to ask, and I came up with a strategy that was actually removable should they change their mind. So those are toned sheets of black Japanese paper that are applied with a reversible water-soluble adhesive, wheat starch paste, and just laid them on top of all the mountains. And I do feel like it was important to preserve that graphic element, those lines there. So conservators can disagree on strategies and go back and forth, and we try to resolve them as best we can with these dialogues. So finally, replication as a conservation strategy. What is a replica? A replica is a recreation of a work of art, and we have two different kinds of conservation-based replicas, the exhibition copy and the refabrication. And you'll notice in both those definitions that these conservation replicas are being used as the work of art. These are not copies, these are not reproductions, these are not models. When they're on display, they have the same status as the work of art. The exhibition copy is temporary, the refabrication is permanent. Now, why would we do this? Why is it requested? The damaged original or lost original, a part of the whole. We have preservation needs. Things are being displayed at high light levels, for example, or they're conceptually materially inherent, or they're requested by the artist or the estate. So, also, not all works of art are eligible to become, to be replicated. So how do we make that decision? There has to be something inherent to the work to make the process viable. There we go. One of those conditions is that it already exists as a multiple, or can exist as a multiple. So photography was one of the first fields or art fields to take advantage of this possibility, this strategy, with the creation of exhibition and reserve copies, and in response to increased demand for these light-sensitive objects. Again, this is photography right from its inception. It was understood that it was going to change. It had vulnerabilities, there were chemical instabilities. So photographers themselves, having the negatives, could reprint, recreate those works. Outside of editions. So that felt like we could take advantage of that strategy. Here we have a Willow-Nassiter that was shown, again, remember my 200-foot candles, in direct light, and also unevenly. So the prints next to the window are going to change at a different rate from the ones further away from the window. And if they want it to be perceived as a whole, you're going to have uneven change. Change is one thing, uneven change is another. So in this case, we requested exhibition copies, which at the end of the exhibition were destroyed. They were torn up in pieces, and I have some in the material archive now for future study of how much that change occurred. So exhibition copies is a strategy that we use. There's another precedent that allows us to consider making replicas, and that's conceptual art, just really challenging the original, the unique, the preciousness of that single work of art, the Dada artists, the Fluxus artists. So here we have a Sol LeWitt and a Felix Gonzalez Torres. Every single time this is installed or changed, it's a different work of art. We start from scratch. Those lines are drawn by hand in a very specific way according to the instructions. The artwork is the instructions and not completely those lines on the wall. It's both. So those are all replicas in some sense. The light strings, those have changed also every time we've installed, because if they go to Europe or if they go to Asia, they have different electrical requirements. They have different light bulbs. Incandescent bulbs are disappearing. So this is something that sort of, we work with the estate to outline the parameters of how much change is acceptable within their understanding of Gonzalez Torres's wishes. Time-based media, technical obsolescence. is a constant challenge for preservation. And they use migrating and digitizing audiovisual materials, repairing and replacing our mechanical components like CRTs, televisions. We're constantly going on eBay. We have a big collection of old televisions and other kinds of obsolescent media. Everybody knows that this is going to be obsolete in a year or two, and you're going to have to upgrade because it's no longer going to work. So this is the challenge for artists who are making, and conservators, artists who are making things on their phone, on the internet, AI, all these challenges are there. So those works are constantly being replicated. There was, for the Cory Archangel, that was created on a Nintendo NES video game system from a hacked cartridge. And he specified that once those Nintendo systems are no longer available, my artwork is dead. He changed his mind. What his condition was, until the general public understands what an emulation is, then we could revive the work from the dead. So as we all become more culturally literate in what technology needs, requires, that was the condition he made. And my final case study is this work of inherent vice of material self-destruction. So inherent vice is a natural characteristic of a material that causes it to damage or destroy itself. It's self-destruction. So I'm going to take a look at this work by Joanne Leonard, Journal of a Miscarriage. So in 2021, we acquired this work, which is a series of collage documenting the artist's personal experience of pregnancy loss. Journal of Miscarriage was one of Leonard's early photo collage works, and according to the artist, the journal is not just the story of the miscarriage, but the feelings afterwards of sexuality and anger, desire, and a desire for pregnancy. It was a daily journaling process. She incorporated these materials from her studio, which she had around books, tissue, crayons, traditional drawing materials. And for two of the works, latex condoms from 1970s. As you might imagine, they don't age very well. One of the works, Condoms with Stamps, exists only as an inkjet, probably because the original was so in such poor condition that it was discarded, and the only thing the artist had left was this image. And so when she submitted the work for acquisition, the inkjet was the artwork, the placeholder. But in a series of 29 collages that are all very texturally rich and dimensional, this grayed out inkjet stuck out like a sore thumb, and it felt a little bit orphaned. And then, of course, death was not exhibitable because of the condition of the latex condom. Latex is a known material that has inherent vice. Other artists have used it. Here we have Ava Huss's Expanded Expansion, as it was installed in 1969 when the latex was still very soft and supple. And then when it was reinstalled in 2022, each of those components, which are owned by different people, and that's what accounts for the different colors, is some of them more exposed or under different conditions, they're brittle. They're hard, they don't have the same kind of characteristics as the original. The question is, does the 2022 version of Expanded Expansion still contain the original meaning, or is it now dead, to use the word used by Cory Archangel? So we're sort of thinking about how change if it's too dramatic, if it's the point of losing meaning or intent. Again, our Linda Benglis example again, the Contraband, 1969. This latex has pigment, so it's a little bit more stable than the Expanded Expansion, but it's still quite brittle and fragile and changing even in the dark. So our traditional strategy of just trying to reduce light exposure is not going to help us with the Contraband. So when the work came in, we proposed this replica for Joanne Leonard, and here she is with her work being used for an exhibition banner at a show that's currently at Vassar. And she was thrilled to hear that we could use this as a strategy. She wasn't aware that this was a possibility, and we can restore meaning to her collage series. So the research began. We found the stamp and bag on eBay, and the artist provided the books she used to create the collage. So that left the condom research. And we collaborated very closely with our objects conservator, Margot, who was working on the bangless at the same time. So she was actually working with the conservation scientists at the Detroit Institute of the Arts. We were able to piggyback some of our samples onto that and get some analysis as to what was going on there. And so our goal initially was to avoid reintroducing the inherent vice of that latex. We discovered very quickly that the condom technologies have changed quite a bit since 1970s. They're different polyurethanes, polyisoprenes. They're thinner, they have different textures. And then there was the question of lubricants that even when we clean them off still stain the paper. So in the end, we will still have to reintroduce the inherent vice. The difference being is that now we've had the conversation with the artist. We know the parameters of what we do. We've documented all the choices, and maybe someday a different material, 50, 100 years from now, will be available to us. So this is not the final replica. This is kind of a proof in concept that we presented to the artist, and we're still requiring some refinement. But she was, in the end, happy with what we were able to do. Now, the conservators don't undertake these processes alone. We don't accept the requests alone. We created a committee to consider all these processes from all aspects. We have conservation and curatorial. We have registration, who thinks about how the materials are going to be handled. Cataloging and archives. What happens to the original when you recreate it? Both of them stay in the collection. They are flagged and have different status. They're both still tracked. And there's more going on there. Legal, we have our lawyer. I think his is the best legal job in New York, is to work at the Whitney. There's so many fascinating questions that he has to deal with. So he's there to protect the artist's rights. Rights and reproductions are there. Publications. This is a new, relatively new addition to the committee, but has become really vital, because what's important to us is that when we create that exhibition copy and hang it in the galleries, that everyone understands what is there. So we've spent a lot of time discussing what an exhibition copy is versus a refabrication, dating, do we indicate all the different changes in the materials? And then we bring in artists as needed. So really, it's my job is collaborative. It involves a lot of problem solving and challenges, and it's really quite a joy. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.